Welcome to Lesson 11 of A Disciple's Guide to Read the Bible. We continue to make progress in the Getting Started series. Hopefully, everything's making sense. Hopefully, the practice is helping you to grow in your ability to read, understand, and apply the Bible. In this lesson, we're going to cover the A part of read, the Ask God Focusing Questions. So if you've been paying attention, you may have realized that so far we've covered what the R stands for, read the passage in context, what the E stands for, which is engage the text by the Spirit, and the D, which is discipleship application. But up to this point, we have not covered the Ask God Focusing Questions portion. And the reason is I wanted you to just start simple. I didn't want to just throw everything at you at once. But I think if you can learn to engage the text, learn to apply the text, and then as you're wrestling through that, then you can see how the asking God focusing questions actually helps with both of those. So why is it important to do the ask God focusing questions whenever you're reading the Bible? Well, there's at least three reasons. One is that if we can ask these God focusing questions, which we'll get to what those are here in just a second, but what they will do is fight the tendency that we have to make the Bible about ourselves. It's very easy, even if we're using the right techniques of interpretation or not meaning to put ourselves in the center, it's easy to do. And so if we ask these God-focusing questions, it fights that tendency. The other two reasons are that the ask God-focusing question step is important. These two reasons are related. If we think about discipleship application, whenever we start to make the Bible about ourselves and we put ourselves too much in the center, even if we don't mean to, it actually becomes more difficult to apply a passage. And so what these God focusing questions will do will actually open up application to us that we may otherwise miss. Because as we start to see God in the Bible, as we start to see His grace, as we start to see how the gospel of Jesus is all the way through Genesis through Revelation, then the Bible will make more sense to us and we can apply it in better ways to our lives. And then the third reason these God-focusing questions help us, and they're important, is they will actually help us engage the text. That sometimes you're just reading a passage and maybe nothing stands out, and you're looking for all these things that I've mentioned to engage the text, but nothing just stands out for whatever reason. Well, you can move on to the God-focusing question part, and sometimes that's going to help you engage the text. And really throughout the read process, you may have picked up on this. This is not meant to be a rigid step-by-step where, okay, I'm going to read the passage in context and then go to engage the text. That it's kind of a back and forth. You go, even while you're reading it in context, you're going to be engaged in the text. And as you're engaging the text, you may go back and read something again, or even question, well, what's the context here? Am I missing something about the context? So there's some back and forth there. Or whenever you start to apply a passage, you may think, oh, okay, is this really how I should be applying it? And a similar thing whenever you add the God-focusing questions step is this will help you dynamically read the Bible. So hopefully these God-focusing questions will make sense. Hopefully they will be helpful to you. So what are they? Well, there's three. And each time you're reading a passage, the intent isn't to use all three. It's usually to use one, maybe a combination of two. And they all start with a G. You can remember it simply as God, grace, gospel. So the God-focusing question related to God is very simply, what does this say about God? What actions is God doing? What attributes is this telling us about God? The second question is, how does this show my need for grace, faith, and or repentance? And then the third question is, how does this point to the gospel of Jesus? So God, grace, gospel is an easy way to remember that. And in the Getting Started series, we're just going to focus on the first one, the question, what does this say about God? Whenever we do the follow-on series, we will cover the other two questions. But we're going to start with what does this say about God? Because one, it's the easiest one to answer. I think it's kind of self-explanatory in terms of how you can use this. But it's also um, a question you can ask of almost every passage in the Bible and at least gain some type of insight by thinking about, okay, where is God in this passage? What is he doing? What is this telling me about him? So let's focus in on this ask question of what does this say about God? Because when we're reading the Bible, growing in our knowledge of God, growing in our love for God, should be one of the main reasons we are opening up the Bible. And so here are a few things to keep in mind as you're asking the what does this say about God question. One, and I've already mentioned this, consider what it says about his actions and attributes. Maybe it really focuses on actions. Maybe it's focusing on different attributes of God, but maybe it's both. But you want to keep those two things in mind as you're answering that question. And try to connect it to what you made note of during the engage portion. So if you noticed one nugget of truth in the engage portion, try to say, okay, what does this nugget of truth say about God? Do that only if it makes sense. Don't try to read an answer into something that's not there. But sometimes it could be, oh, okay, I see what this is. I see what this is saying about God. Maybe a little bit different than the nugget of truth from the engage portion, but you could maybe see how those connect, and it gives you a fuller understanding of the passage. And again, feel free to use the ask question, the what does this say about God, to help you engage the text. Because there are many times I'll get stuck and I will ask, okay, what does it say about God? And I will start to look and see where God is in a passage and what he's doing, what the passage is telling me about his character. And it's going to help me understand and then apply that passage. Now, this isn't meant to be a theology exam, so don't overcomplicate it. And to show you how simple this can be, let's go back and revisit the end of Exodus 2. So we looked at all of Exodus 2 and the practice passages, but I want to look just at the end of Exodus 2, verses 23 through 25. And I have those written out in your workbook. And it says, during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So the ask portion is very simple. What does this say about God? And here on these passages, I see a few things, and I've got them listed out, but I don't want you to think that these things that we see about God are completely disconnected, that whenever you look at them together, it really gives us a beautiful picture of who God is. So the three things I see in this passage in terms of what it tells us about God is, number one, God hears the prayers and cries of his people. You can see that very clearly in the passage. And so I think you can see that you don't have to make anything up to answer this question. The second one is God remembers and keeps his promises. It says it there in verse 24. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And so God remembers the promises he has made. Not only that, he will keep his promises. So that's something else this tells us about God. And then the third thing I see is that God knows his people and is not distant. It says God saw the people of Israel and God new. So God is there with His people, even in this difficult time. And so maybe there's some other aspects about God you see in those three verses, but those are at least three, and it gives you this understanding of a God who cares, a God who hears, a God who will be faithful, a God we can trust. And so, as you think about that, what I would encourage you to do is now say, okay, now that we've answered, what does this say about God? Think through how this can apply to your life as a disciple. Because again, the goal here is that these questions help you better apply the Bible. So hopefully this makes sense. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about discipleship application and how it relates to the ask portion a little bit more. But go ahead and think through how asking, what does this say about God, can help you apply Exodus 2:23 through 25.